The wind coming off the Hudson River in January of 1935 didn't just blow, it cut. It was a sharp, merciless chill that rattled the window panes of the brownstones on 135th Street and seeped through the thin wool coats of men standing in bread lines. The Great Depression wasn't just a headline in the newspapers anymore. By 1935, it was a permanent resident in Harlem. It sat at the dinner table where plates were half empty, and it slept in the cold tenement halls. But even in this freezing darkness, there was a heartbeat, there was a rhythm, and there was an order. Harlem was not a lawless place. It had its own laws, written not on paper, but in the nod of a head, the exchange of a favor, and the silence of a witness. And the man who enforced these unwritten laws was not a politician, and he certainly wasn't a police officer. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was 30 years old, sharp as a razor blade and just as cold when he needed to be. He wasn't yet the old man the history books would later mythologize. He was young, hungry, and building an empire. He understood something that most men of his time missed. Power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. Power is about being the one who decides when the noise stops. But in the winter of 1935, a new kind of noise had started creeping into the edges of the neighborhood. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't the rival numbers bankers like Dutch Schultz, though they were always a headache. This was something different, something ancient and ugly that had crawled up from the South, hiding behind the veneer of Northern respectability. The Ku Klux Klan in New York didn't operate like they did in Mississippi or Alabama. Down south they rode openly, secure in their terror. Up north, in the concrete jungle of Manhattan, they were cowards who wore suits during the day and shadows at night. They knew they couldn't march down Lenox Avenue without starting a war they would lose. So they worked like a virus, quiet threats, burning rags thrown into black-owned shops, and intimidation tactics aimed at the families who had moved north looking for a better life. They weren't trying to conquer Harlem, they were trying to remind Harlem of its place. They were trying to inject fear into a community that was already fighting for survival. Bumpy Johnson took many things. He took bets, he took territory, and he took respect. But he did not take insults, and he certainly did not take threats against his people. To Bumpy, Harlem wasn't just a neighborhood, it was his place of business, and nobody disrupts business. It started on a Tuesday night, inside the back office of the Hi-Hat Club. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the muffled sound of a trumpet playing a slow, mournful blues set out in the main room. Bumpy sat behind a mahogany desk that was meticulously organized. There was no clutter, just a ledger, an ashtray, and a glass of water. He was reading a report, his face impassive, his eyes scanning the numbers with the precision of an accountant. Sitting across from him was Illinois Gordon. If Bumpy was the brain of the operation, Illinois was the heart and often the fist. He was lean, dressed in a pinstripe suit that had seen better days but was pressed to perfection. Illinois was loyal to a fault, the kind of man who would walk into hell if Bumpy said there was an exit on the other side. But tonight Illinois looked troubled. He wasn't drinking his bourbon, which was the first sign that something was wrong. "Spit it out, Ill," Bumpy said, without looking up from his ledger. "You're making the air heavy." Illinois shifted in his chair. "We got a problem on the edge of the district, Bump, near the river, 140th and the industrial strip." "Schultz's boys?" Bumpy asked, finally looking up. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and unreadable. "No, not the Dutchman, this is different." Illinois leaned forward, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "You know Mrs. Gable, the widow who runs the laundry service near the bridge?" Bumpy nodded. He knew everyone. Mrs. Gable was a pillar of the community, a woman who had fed half the neighborhood kids when their parents were out of work. She paid her protection money on time, not because she was forced to, but because she viewed it as insurance. "Someone paid her a visit last night," Illinois said, his jaw tightening. "For men, they didn't take money. They smashed up her machines, ruined the inventory, and they left a note." Illinois reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He slid it across the desk. Bumpy picked it up. It was cheap stationery, the kind you could buy at any five and dime. On it, scrawled in jagged, angry handwriting, were three letters, KKK, and below that a single sentence, "Go back where you came from." Bumpy stared at the note. He didn't crumble it. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He went very, very still. It was the stillness of a predator that had just caught a scent. "She see them?" Bumpy asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Masked," Illinois replied, "but she said they didn't sound like street thugs. They spoke proper, like they were educated, and they drove away in two cars, new models, Buicks maybe." Bumpy placed the note gently on the desk, smoothing out the creases. "New cars," he murmured. "That means money. That means they aren't local junkies looking for a thrill. This is organized." "There's more," Illinois added. "Since this morning I've heard whispers. A couple of the boys running numbers down by the docks got jumped. Nothing fatal, just beatings, warning shots. These guys are testing the perimeter, Bump. They want to see if we'll push back." Bumpy stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the street below, the neon signs flickering, the people hurrying through the cold, the life of Harlem moving despite the hardship. He knew what this was. This wasn't just racism, this was a probe. The Klan, or whoever was wearing those hoods, was testing the waters. If they could terrorize a widow and beat up a few runners without consequence, they would grow bolder. Next, it would be a church, then a home. "They think we're still in Georgia," Bumpy said softly to the glass. "They think because the law doesn't care about us that we're defenseless." He turned back to Illinois. "They forgot that up here, we are the law." "What's the play?" Illinois asked. "I can get 20 guys down there tonight. We can sweep the riverfront." "No," Bumpy said sharply. "That's what they want, a riot, chaos. If we send an army, the NYPD comes down on us, not them. The papers will scream about a Negro riot in Harlem. We play this smart." Bumpy walked back to his desk and sat down. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small black book. "You said they were driving new cars, Buicks. That means they're coming from outside, Jersey maybe, or Connecticut. They aren't sleeping in Harlem. They're commuting in to play terrorist." He looked at Illinois. "I need eyes, I need to know where they're meeting. Rats like this don't scurry around in the daylight. They have a nest, find it." For the next 3 days, the machine of Bumpy Johnson's organization went into high gear. But it moved in silence. There were no loud threats, no public displays of anger. Instead, the eyes and ears of Harlem opened up. The shoeshine boys, the bartenders, the dock workers, the late-night diner waitresses, everyone was watching. Information in the underworld is more valuable than gold, and Bumpy Johnson had the best currency in town. By Friday afternoon, the picture began to clear. A contact who worked at a gas station on the Jersey side of the bridge reported a group of men who came through every Tuesday and Friday night. They drove nice cars, wore heavy coats, and never tipped. Another contact, a watchman at an abandoned textile factory on the edge of the Harlem River, noticed lights in the basement windows, windows that should have been dark for years. The factory was a relic of the industrial boom, a red brick skeleton sitting on a desolate stretch of land where the city dumped its trash and forgot its problems. It was isolated, dark, and perfect for men who wanted to do bad things without being seen. On Friday evening, Bumpy called a meeting, not a big one, just the people who mattered. The back room of the hi-hat was locked. Bumpy sat at the head of the table. To his right was Illinois Gordon. To his left was a man known simply as Specs. Specs was a quiet, unassuming man who wore thick glasses and looked like a librarian. But in Harlem, people knew better. Specs was arguably the best marksman in New York City. He didn't talk much, but when he pointed a finger, people fell down. "We located the nest," Bumpy said, his voice steady. "That old textile mill by the 145th Street Bridge. They're meeting tonight. Our scout counted 10 men going in, 2 cars, they're carrying crates." "Crates?" Specs asked, polishing his glasses. "Gasoline," Bumpy replied, "and wood. They aren't just meeting tonight." They're planning a burning, probably the church on 138th for Sunday service. A heavy silence filled the room. Burning a church wasn't just an attack, it was a declaration of war on the soul of the community. 10 men, Illinois calculated. We should take 15, surround the building, light it up with them inside. No, Bumpy said, we're not arsonists and we're not a mob. If we burn the building, the fire department comes. The police come. It becomes a circus. Bumpy leaned forward, his eyes locking with Illinois and then Specs. We go in, just us, the three of us. Illinois blinked. 3, against 10. Bump, I know you're good, but that's bad math. It's the right math, Bumpy corrected. If we bring a crowd, they'll hear us coming. They'll scatter, or worse, they'll start shooting before we even get close, and a stray bullet hits a kid in the tenements nearby. We need surgical precision. We need to walk in there, deliver the message, and walk out. And we need to do it so quietly that the police won't even know it happened until the bodies start cooling. Specs put his glasses back on. 10 men, close quarters, that's not a shootout, Bumpy, that's a slaughter. Exactly, Bumpy said, but not for us. He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. It was a charcoal gray wool, impeccable and sharp. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a pair of leather gloves. He slid them on, slowly, deliberately. These men think they are superior, Bumpy said, his voice cold as the river ice. They think their white skin is armor. They think their hoods make them invisible. Tonight, we're going to teach them that in Harlem, the only color that matters is red, and everyone bleeds it the same. He looked at his two friends. These were men he had grown up with, men he had starved with, men who had stood back to back with him in prison yards and alleyways. You boys ready to go to work? Illinois Gordon cracked a smile, a grim, dangerous expression. He reached under his coat and checked the weight of the .38 snub nose tucked in his shoulder holster. I hate working Fridays, he deadpanned, but for this, I'll work overtime for free. Specs didn't smile. He just checked the chamber of his pistol, clicked the safety on, and nodded. Let's go, Bumpy said. The three men walked out of the back room, through the smoke-filled club, and out into the biting cold of the Harlem night. They didn't run, they didn't hide. They walked with the rhythm of the city, three shadows moving against the darkness, heading toward the river where the wolves were waiting. But the wolves had no idea that the lions were coming to dinner. The industrial district of Harlem at midnight was a graveyard of ambition. It was where the city ended and the wasteland began. The streetlights here had been broken for months, their glass shattered by kids throwing rocks, leaving the cobblestones bathed only in the pale, sickly light of a half-moon. The wind coming off the river carried the smell of diesel, rotting wood, and the salty dampness of the Atlantic tide pushing up the Hudson. Bumpy, Illinois, and Specs moved through this landscape not like men, but like ghosts. They didn't stick to the sidewalks. They moved through the alleyways, stepping over frozen puddles and piles of refuse, their eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. 10 years of working together had created a telepathy between them. A slight tilt of Illinois' head meant clear. A hand gesture from Specs meant noise ahead. They reached the perimeter of the textile factory at 12:15 a.m. It was a looming, 3-story brick beast, its windows boarded up with plywood that had grayed with age. But Bumpy's intel was good. Faint slivers of orange light escaped through the cracks in the basement windows. And parked around the back, tucked behind a loading dock to hide them from the main road, were the cars. Two 1934 Buick sedans, black, polished, gleaming in the darkness. They looked alien here, surrounded by rust and decay. These were rich men's cars, cars that belonged in driveways in Connecticut suburbs, not behind a derelict factory in Harlem. Bumpy stopped by the rear fender of the lead Buick. He ran a gloved hand over the hood. It was still warm. Engines warm, Bumpy whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. They haven't been here long. Illinois Gordon knelt by the rear tire. He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, a slender piece of Italian steel. He looked up at Bumpy for the signal. Bumpy gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. With a quick, practiced motion, Illinois jammed the blade into the sidewall of the tire. There was a hiss of escaping air, quickly swallowed by the wind. He moved to the next tire. Then the next. Within 60 seconds, both getaway cars were sitting on their rims. "Nobody's running home to Mama tonight," Illinois muttered, wiping the blade on his coat. "Specs," Bumpy said softly, "the door." Specs moved to the rear service entrance. It was a heavy steel door, rusted shut, but Specs knew locks and he knew leverage. He didn't force it, he inspected the hinges. He took out a small oil can he kept in his kit. Specs was always prepared and greased the rusted joints. Then, using a crowbar wrapped in a cloth to muffle the sound, he applied pressure. The metal groaned, a low protest, but it gave way. The door swung open a few inches, revealing a black abyss that smelled of mildew and kerosene. They slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The silence in the factory was heavy, oppressive. But from below, through the floorboards, came the sound of voices, muffled laughter. The clinking of glass, the confident, booming tones of men who thought they owned the world. They found the stairwell leading down to the basement. Bumpy took the lead. He moved down the wooden steps, testing each one for creaks before putting his full weight on it. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. Through the crack, Bumpy could see them. The basement was a cavernous space, illuminated by portable kerosene lanterns that threw long, dancing shadows against the brick walls. In the center of the room was a large wooden table covered in maps, and around it stood 10 men. They weren't wearing hoods, not yet. Their white robes were folded on chairs or hanging on nails on the wall. They were in their shirt sleeves, suspenders, and ties. Bumpy studied their faces. He memorized them. There was a man who looked like a banker, soft hands, rimless glasses. There was a younger one, muscular, maybe a college athlete, holding a bottle of whiskey. There was an older man with a scar on his chin, cleaning a revolver with a rag. These weren't monsters from a fairy tale. They were regular men, men who probably went to church on Sundays, kissed their wives, and then came here to plan murder. And that made it worse. "Start the fire at the rear vestry," the banker was saying, pointing at a map of the 138th Street Baptist Church. "The wood is old there. It'll go up like kindling. By the time the fire trucks get past 125th Street, the roof will be gone." "What about the people inside?" the young athlete asked, taking a swig of whiskey. "Service runs late on Sundays." The older man with the scar laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "That's the point, kid. Fear doesn't work if nobody gets hurt. You want these people to leave. You gotta show them that nowhere is safe." Bumpy felt Illinois stiffen beside him. He placed a hand on Illinois' shoulder, a silent command to hold. Not yet. Bumpy pulled his own weapon. It wasn't a pistol. It was a sawed-off, double-barreled shotgun, the stock cut down so it could fit under his coat. It was a brutal weapon, designed for close quarters, a trench sweeper. He turned to Specs and whispered, "The lamps." Specs nodded. He pulled a silencer from his pocket and screwed it onto the barrel of his .22 caliber pistol. It wouldn't be silent, but it would be quiet enough. Bumpy turned to Illinois. "The door, you block it, nobody gets out." Illinois moved to the side of the doorframe, his .38 drawn, his face a mask of stone. Bumpy took a deep breath. He adjusted his fedora, and then he kicked the door wide open. Slam! The wood smashed against the stone wall with a sound like a thunderclap. The laughter in the room died instantly. 10 heads snapped toward the doorway. For a second, nobody moved. The scene was frozen in time, the whiskey bottle halfway to a mouth, the finger pointing at a map, the rag cleaning the gun. And there, standing in the doorway, framed by the darkness of the stairwell, was Bumpy Johnson. He didn't look like a gangster. He looked like a businessman who had arrived to audit the books. His coat was immaculate, his face was calm, only his eyes betrayed the violence that was coming. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It had a baritone weight to it. I believe you're lost." The banker with the rimless glasses was the first to recover. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly with indignation. "This is a private meeting." "I know," Bumpy said, stepping into the room. The floorboards creaked under his shoes. "I heard the agenda: arson, murder, terrorizing old ladies." The older man with the scar dropped the cleaning rag. His hand drifted toward the revolver on the table. "Don't," Bumpy said. He didn't raise the shotgun, he just looked at the man. "You touch that iron, and you'll be the first one to find out if the devil accepts late arrivals." The man froze. There was something in Bumpy's eyes, a total absence of fear, that made the man hesitate, and hesitation in the underworld is a death sentence. "There are 10 of us," the young athlete said, trying to sound tough though he had put the bottle down, "and one of you." Bumpy smiled. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a sheep that had wandered too far from the herd. "You count like a schoolboy," Bumpy said, "but you're looking at the wrong numbers." Vut. Two soft sounds, like a book closing. Suddenly, 2 of the 3 kerosene lanterns hanging from the ceiling exploded. Glass shattered, raining down on the men. The room plunged into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the single remaining lamp in the far corner and the faint moonlight from the high windows. Panic erupted. The men scrambled back, knocking over chairs. "He's not alone," someone screamed. "Get the lights." "Where's the gun?" Bumpy didn't move. He stood like a statue in the chaos. "I told you," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't a meeting anymore, it's a classroom, and class is in session." The man with the scar finally grabbed his revolver and raised it, aiming at Bumpy's silhouette. "Die, you black." Boom! The shotgun in Bumpy's hands roared. It wasn't a warning shot. Bumpy didn't believe in warning shots. The blast caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and throwing him over the table. The maps of Harlem were instantly soaked in red. The room went into shock. The sheer violence of the sound, the smell of gunpowder filling the enclosed space, the sight of their leader down, it broke them. These men were bullies, not soldiers. They were used to intimidation, not combat. "Illinois," Bumpy shouted. From the shadows of the doorway, Illinois stepped out, his .38 raised. He didn't fur. Wildly, he fired twice. One shot took the banker in the knee, sending him crumbling to the floor, screaming. The second shot hit the young athlete in the arm just as he reached for a shotgun leaning against the wall. "Nobody leaves," Illinois roared, kicking the door shut behind him and standing in front of it. Now only 7 men were standing. They were backing away, huddled together near the burning embers of the broken lanterns. They were armed, some had knives, some had pistols tucked in their waistbands, but they were terrified. They were looking at Bumpy and Illinois like they were demons summoned from the earth. Bumpy cracked the shotgun open, the empty shell casing pinging as it hit the concrete floor. He calmly reached into his pocket and reloaded. The sound of the fresh shells sliding into the chamber, click-clack, was louder than the screaming banker. "Now," Bumpy said, snapping the gun shut, "you wanted to burn down my neighborhood. You wanted to hurt my people." He took a step forward. The 7 men took a step back. "Let's see if you burn as good as you talk." From the dark corner of the room, high up on a catwalk they hadn't even noticed, a voice floated down. It was Specs. "Clear shot on the left flank, Bumpy. Just give the word." The Klan members looked up, eyes wide. They were surrounded, triangulated. They realized then that this wasn't a fight. They had walked into a slaughterhouse. Bumpy looked at the trembling men. He saw the realization in their eyes. The arrogance was gone. The racial superiority was gone. All that was left was the primal, shaking fear of men who knew they were about to die. "You have guns," Bumpy said, gesturing with the barrel of his shotgun. "Pick them up." Nobody moved. "I said pick them up." Bumpy's voice was like a whip crack. "I want you to be holding them when you go, so nobody can say Bumpy Johnson murdered unarmed men. I want hell to know you tried." One by one, with shaking hands, the remaining men reached for their weapons. The air was thick with smoke, blood, and the smell of fear. The silence that followed was the heavy breath before the plunge. Bumpy adjusted his grip on the shotgun. Illinois, Specs, time to take out the trash. And then the shadows truly began to bleed. The basement erupted into a cacophony of thunder and screams. For the untrained men of the Klan, the darkness was their enemy. They fired blindly, their muzzle flashes lighting up the room in strobe-light bursts of panic. Bullets chipped the brick walls, shattered the remaining furniture, and sparked against the iron pipes overhead. They were shooting at ghosts. But Bumpy Johnson's men were not ghosts, they were professionals. From the catwalk above, Specs was a phantom. His silence .22 pistol spit rhythmically, phut, phut, phut. He didn't shoot to kill instantly, he shot to dismantle. A bullet through a hand holding a pistol, a bullet into a kneecap. He was surgically removing the threats from above, calm as a man pruning a bonsai tree. By the door, Illinois Gordon was a wall of fire. 2 Klan members, desperate to escape, charged at him with knives. Illinois didn't flinch. He fired twice, center mass. The men dropped before they could even scream. Illinois stepped over them, his eyes scanning for the next target, his back firmly against the exit. The message was clear: the only way out is through me. And in the center of the storm walked Bumpy Johnson. He moved with a terrifying deliberation. He didn't run, he didn't duck, he advanced. A Klan member popped up from behind the overturned table, raising a snub-nosed revolver. Bumpy swung the shotgun. The butt of the weapon connected with the man's jaw with a sickening crunch, spinning him into the darkness. Another man, the one who had been holding the whiskey bottle earlier, lunged at Bumpy. Bumpy sidestepped, grabbed the man by his tie, and slammed his head into a support pillar. The man crumpled like a wet rag. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of will. It was the difference between men who played at violence on the weekends and men who lived it every single day. In less than 90 seconds, the guns fell silent. The basement was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, dust, and blood. Groans of pain echoed from the floor. 7 men lay still or writhed in agony. The only ones left standing were Bumpy, Illinois, and Specs, who was now climbing down the ladder from the catwalk. Bumpy walked over to the center of the room. The banker, the leader with the rimless glasses, was crawling across the dirty floor, clutching his shattered knee. He was trying to reach a dropped pistol a few feet away. Bumpy stepped on the pistol. Then he stepped on the banker's hand. The man screamed, a high-pitched, pathetic sound that bounced off the cold brick walls. Bumpy knelt down. He wasn't out of breath. His hat was still perfectly straight. He grabbed the banker by the collar of his expensive tweed suit and pulled him close. "Look at me," Bumpy whispered. The banker looked. His eyes were wide, filled with tears and shock. He was looking into the face of a man who had stared down death in solitary confinement, in alleyways, in the darkest corners of America. "You came here to teach a lesson," Bumpy said softly. "Did you learn yours?" "Please," the banker whimpered. "I have money, I can pay you, I know people in City Hall." Bumpy chuckled. It was a dark, dry sound. "You still don't get it, this isn't about money. And your friends in City Hall, they can't help you here. This is Harlem. Up here I am City Hall." Bumpy stood up. He looked around the room at the carnage. Then his eyes landed on the youngest Klan member, the college kid. The boy was huddled in the corner, unharmed but shaking so violently his teeth were chattering. He had dropped his gun the moment the shooting started. Bumpy walked over to him. The boy covered his head, sobbing. "Get up," Bumpy ordered. The boy scrambled to his feet, pressing his back against the wall. "You're the messenger," Bumpy said. The boy blinked, confused, terrified. "I'm going to let you walk out of here," Bumpy continued. "You're going to get in your car on its rims, and you're going to drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of. And you're going to tell your friends, your father, your grand dragon, whoever sent you. You tell them what you saw tonight." Bumpy leaned in close, his voice dropping to a growl. "Tell them that Harlem isn't open for business. Tell them that if I see one more hood, one more burning cross, or one more threat against my people, I won't leave anyone alive to tell the story next time. Do you understand? The boy nodded frantically. Yes, yes, I understand. Get out, Bumpy said. The boy didn't wait. He ran past Illinois, who stepped aside just enough to let him pass, and scrambled up the stairs, tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape the nightmare. Bumpy turned back to the banker on the floor. Illinois, Bumpy said, help our friend here understand the geography. Illinois walked over, holstered his gun, and pulled out a map from his pocket, a map of New York City. He dropped it on the banker's chest. You're off the map, pal, Illinois said. Bumpy checked his pocket watch. 12:30, the shots would have been heard. The police will take 10 minutes to pretend they're hurrying, and another 10 to actually get here. Plenty of time, Specs said, wiping a smudge of oil from his pistol. They didn't run out, they walked. They exited through the rear door, leaving the carnage behind them. They slipped into the shadows of the industrial yard, disappearing into the labyrinth of Harlem streets just as the faint wail of sirens began to rise in the distance. The next morning, the newspapers reported a gangland disturbance in an abandoned warehouse. The police report was vague. It mentioned rival criminal elements and illegal gambling disputes. There was no mention of the KKK, no mention of the maps of black churches. The city wanted to bury it. The Klan wanted to hide their humiliation. But in Harlem, the truth didn't need newspapers. The story passed from the stoops to the barbershops, from the jazz clubs to the Sunday dinner tables. They whispered about the night Bumpy Johnson and two men walked into a den of wolves and skinned them alive. They talked about how the Klan packed up their operations in Upper Manhattan and never, ever came back. Mrs. Gable, the widow who ran the laundry, found an envelope under her door 2 days later. Inside was enough cash to replace her machines twice over. No note, no name, just the money. Bumpy Johnson went on to become the godfather of Harlem. He fought mobsters, he fought the law, and he fought for his place in history. But for the people who lived through that winter of 1935, he was something more than a gangster. On that cold night by the river, he proved that a king doesn't just rule his subjects, he bleeds for them. And he proved that respect isn't given, it's taken. One bullet, one broken jaw, and one message at a time. They don't make men like Bumpy Johnson anymore. In a world where people talk tough behind screens, Bumpy was the kind of man who stood in the doorway and handled his business face to face. If you respect the code of the old school, where loyalty meant everything and consequences were real, then you're in the right place. We're digging up the stories that history tried to sanitize. Do me a favor, hit that like button if you think Harlem was better off with Bumpy protecting it, and subscribe to the channel right now. Next week, we're telling the true story of how Bumpy outsmarted Dutch Schultz without firing a single shot. You don't want to miss that. Stay sharp, stay loyal, and remember, never enter a room you don't know how to walk out of.